August 26, 1346, a muddy field near Crécy in northern France. 9,000 exhausted Englishmen, many of them sick and starving, stare across a valley. Facing them, 30,000 of Europe's finest knights, a glittering sea of steel and silk. The French are confident, arrogant even. They believe this will be a slaughter. They are right, but not in the way they imagine. By sunset, their entire world will end. Because this is the story of Crécy, 1346, the day the knight died. For 500 years, the armored knight ruled Europe. They were the tanks of the medieval world, clad in plate armor worth more than an entire village. Their war horses, great destriers, were bred for a single purpose: to crash through enemy lines like a living avalanche. They believed their courage, their faith, and their noble bloodline made them invincible. An army's strength was measured by how many of these iron men it could field. And then came the peasants, the commoners, the men who owned nothing but the clothes on their backs and a simple weapon made of wood and string. For centuries, the knight had been the answer to every tactical problem. But on this field, the English would ask a new question. What happens when the unstoppable force meets a storm of arrows? Outnumbered 3-1, King Edward III of England knew a conventional battle was suicide. His men were tired, hungry, and far from home. A head-on charge against the French cavalry would be over in minutes. So he did the unthinkable, something that went against every rule of chivalry and warfare. He ordered his own knights, his lords and nobles, to dismount. They would fight on foot, shoulder to shoulder with the common archers. For a knight, to be separated from his horse in battle was the ultimate dishonor. But Edward was a pragmatist. He knew this wasn't a tournament. It was a fight for survival. And so, on that muddy hillside, chivalry itself was being buried before the battle had even begun. The age of the noble warrior was about to be challenged by the cold, hard logic of tactics. As the French army began to assemble across the valley, a strange calm fell over the English camp. While the French trumpets blared and banners unfurled in a glorious, chaotic display of feudal pride, the English prepared in silence. The longbowmen methodically waxed their bowstrings, ensuring they wouldn't snap under pressure. They hammered sharpened stakes into the ground before their lines, a simple but deadly defense against charging horses. They ate a last meal of meat and bread, drank a final cup of ale, and made their peace. They were professional soldiers, not aristocrats playing at war. Across the valley, the French nobles argued. They squabbled over who would have the honor of capturing the English king, who would claim the most ransom, and who would lead the first glorious charge. Their pride was their greatest weapon, and it was about to become their undoing. King Philip VI of France, seeing the disarray of his own army and the darkening sky, gave a sensible order: make camp, rest, and attack with full force in the morning. His nobles, however, would have none of it. They accused him of cowardice, of trying to shield the English from their righteous fury. Eager for glory, they surged forward, disobeying their king's direct command. Then the heavens opened. A torrential summer rainstorm soaked the battlefield. The English, with quiet discipline, unstrung their bows, tucking the precious hemp strings under their caps to keep them dry. The French had hired thousands of Genoese crossbowmen to soften the English lines. But their crossbows, with their shorter, thicker strings, couldn't be easily unstrung. The rain soaked them, stretching the sinew and rendering them useless. That single act of foresight, born from the practical experience of the common English archer, would decide the fate of thousands of lives. The rain stopped. The sun emerged, shining directly into the eyes of the advancing French. The Genoese crossbowmen moved forward, their weapons already compromised. They fired a volley. The bolts fell short, landing harmlessly in the mud. Then the English commander gave the order. 5,000 longbowmen drew their bows in unison. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a sound like a terrible tearing canvas filled the air. 60,000 arrows a minute screamed into the sky, blotting out the sun. The arrow storm had begun. The sky turned black with bodkin points. The Genoese, who had never faced anything like this, were annihilated. Their unarmored ranks were shredded. They broke and ran. And as they fled, the French knights behind them, furious at this perceived cowardice, saw it as a betrayal. They drew their swords and cut down their own mercenaries, nobility murdering commoners in the mud, a grim foreshadowing of the day's horrors. With the Genoese gone, the French knights decided it was their turn. This was what they were born for. 12,000 of them, the flower of French chivalry, lowered their lances and charged. But they weren't charging across a pristine tournament ground. They were charging uphill, through a field churned to thick, clinging mud by the rain and thousands of panicked feet. They were charging through the corpses of the Genoese. And they were charging directly into a storm of steel-tipped arrows that never seemed to end. The English archers aimed for the horses. The massive war horses, less armored than their riders, screamed and fell, breaking their legs in the mud and hidden ditches. Knights in armor weighing over 60 pounds were thrown to the ground, where they were trapped, unable to get up, crushed by their own falling comrades. The glorious charge turned into a chaotic, screaming pileup of men and animals, hammered relentlessly by arrows from above. The English archers were firing so fast they began to run out of arrows. But the battlefield provided a gruesome resupply. Young boys and archers themselves ran forward into the carnage, pulling arrows from the twitching bodies of men and horses, resupplying the firing line. The French charged not once, not twice, but 16 times. Each wave of knights clambered over the growing mountain of their own dead, each charge smaller, more desperate, more doomed than the last. The English archers, having exhausted their arrows, finally picked up mallets, swords, and axes. They swarmed down the hill, light and nimble on their feet, and fell upon the trapped, exhausted knights, finishing them off like turtles stuck on their backs. It was no longer a battle, it was an execution. In the midst of this slaughter, one of the most poignant tales of the medieval age unfolded. John, the old blind king of Bohemia, was told that the battle was lost. Refusing to flee, he declared, "Take me to the place where the noise of the battle is loudest, that I may strike one good blow with my sword." He ordered his retainers to tie their horses' reins to his own, forming a small, doomed phalanx. Together, this knot of loyal knights rode blind into the heart of the English lines. He died as he had lived, a knight to the very end, swinging his sword blindly in the chaos. When his body was found the next day, his knights were still linked to him, all dead together. You could say the last true knight died blind in the mud at Crécy. When the sun rose the next morning, it revealed a scene from a nightmare. The French army had ceased to exist. France's nobility lay dead or dying in heaps across the valley. Over 1,000 princes, dukes, and counts were gone. In total, more than 10,000 French soldiers had perished. English losses? Perhaps 40 men? Perhaps 100? No one knows for sure because no one bothered to count the common dead. But the message was clear. The crows on the battlefield grew so fat from the feast of arrogance that they could barely lift themselves into the air. The age of chivalry had drowned in a sea of blood and mud. Crécy didn't just kill knights, it killed the idea that noble blood made a man superior on the battlefield. It proved that a well-trained peasant with a longbow was more valuable than a prince on a warhorse. The battle was a brutal lesson in mathematics. Courage couldn't stop an arrow. Nobility couldn't deflect a bodkin point. For the first time, a king had trusted his kingdom's fate to commoners, and they had delivered a victory that would echo through history. The world had changed forever. The age of the knight was over. The weapon that ended the age of chivalry, the longbow, would itself be rendered obsolete by gunpowder a few centuries later. The musketeer would replace the archer, just as the archer had replaced the knight. History is a relentless cycle of innovation and obsolescence. Every weapon becomes a relic, but every revolution, whether military or social, begins in the same way, with one side refusing to accept that the world has changed, and the other seizing the future with both hands. Crécy was the bloody birth of that new world, a world where sticks and string could topple a crown. Thanks so much for watching. This battle is one of the most fascinating turning points in history. If you enjoyed this journey into the past, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that shaped our world. We'll see you in the next one.